I never thought my life would turn out like this. Built on little lies and big wants, with failures that stung and a quiet kind of redemption I almost didn't notice. But here I am, I'm Nicole, telling you what really happened. It began long before I ever saw Peter in a crowded room, before I even knew the word deception. And it moves, step by step, from a childhood that cracked apart to the moment I learned what real love looks like when the lights are off and no one's posting about it. I grew up in two different worlds. In the first, my mom married Lawrence, an older widower with 2 adult kids. He was successful and kind to me. We lived in a big house outside LA, marble floors, a bright blue pool, lemon trees that made the air smell clean. He called me princess. I learned how to behave at fancy dinners and how to be quiet when adults wanted me to disappear into the background. We spent every school break in Europe, summers on the coast, quick trips to Italy in the fall, winter holidays in the mountains. By 10, I knew Paris better than Los Angeles and treated it like a second home. My mom adapted fast. She became a fashion icon in our circle, wearing only the best clothes, always in new season looks, always camera ready. Lawrence's kids, Emily and James, were polite but cold. Their real smiles were reserved for other people. When I was 13, Lawrence died suddenly, alone in a hotel room on a business trip. The call came early. My mom answered, went very still, and then set the phone down like it weighed too much. For a few days, everything moved in slow motion. Casseroles from neighbors, suits in garment bags, people talking softly in corners. At the memorial, his colleagues said things like pillar and visionary, and strangers hugged me as if their perfume could keep me from breaking. Then came the paperwork. The will was old, signed years before my mom, and it left everything to his children. Everything. The hotels with polished lobbies, the investments that were supposed to take care of everyone, the houses with lemon trees and quiet hallways. My mom's name wasn't anywhere. There was no clause, no carve-out, no in recognition of, just a clean transfer to Emily and James, who stood at the reading with professional sadness and lawyers who spoke for them. The change was fast. Within weeks, we were out. The house turned cold around us, literally and otherwise. I remember the estate manager walking us through rooms like a tour we didn't want, reminding us which pieces were part of the collection. Movers wrapped paintings we weren't allowed to touch. A woman with a clipboard wrote down the serial number on our toaster and asked where we'd gotten it. My mom, who could glide through any room, suddenly had nowhere to put her hands. She slipped out a few nice things, quietly, carefully, like a person gathering crumbs after the table has been cleared. A bracelet she'd worn on their first anniversary. 2 dresses she said were personal effects. A pair of handbags she justified as gifts. Not theft, not to her, just salvage. Everything else stayed. The pool still shone in the sun. It just wasn't ours to swim in. We moved into a 1-bedroom apartment on the edge of a loud street. The walls were thin enough that we learned the neighbor's TV schedule and the sound of their blender. The hallway always smelled like old cooking oil, boiled cabbage, something sweet that had burned. Our boxes didn't fill the new place, they just looked tired in it. I slept on a pullout, close enough to the kitchen that the fridge hum felt like company. The windows rattled when the bus passed. At night, car lights brushed the ceiling like slow lightning. My mom tried to hold her shape the first week, perfume in the morning, lipstick with her coffee, but the routines didn't fit the new space. The fancy hangers bowed under supermarket closet rods. The dresses looked like costumes against chipped paint. She stopped opening the jewelry box unless a bill was due. We learned which faucets to turn slowly, which outlets sparked, which part of the floor creaked when you stepped there in the dark. The mansion receded like a dream you try to remember on purpose and can't. That was the second world. My mom shut down. She said regular jobs weren't for her. We lived by selling off what we had, piece by piece. First the good jewelry, then the evening bags, then scarves and shoes that once felt like armor. When something wouldn't sell, we tried again the next week at a different shop, a different story. I learned the script pawn shops use when they're lowballing you. How they sigh, point out a scratch, call it seasonal, and slide a number across the counter that makes your throat tighten. The apartment was small and loud. The bedroom windows rattled in wind. The hallway always smelled like old cooking oil. The oven ran hot, the shower ran cold, and the radiator clicked like it was counting down. We kept a towel against the bathroom door to block the draft in winter. Some nights, the neighbors fought until 3 a.m., and I'd put a pillow over my head and pretend I was somewhere else. Money was constant math. Rent due on the 1st, phone bill on the 8th, bus pass on the 10th, groceries whenever we could push them. Late fees stacked like dominoes. We bought the cheapest detergent and split it into old water bottles. I stretched shampoo with water, wore the same jeans 3 times a week, patched a rip on the inside seam with black thread that didn't match. Dinner was rice and eggs, or noodles with butter and pepper, or a can of soup split into 2 bowls. On good weeks, we added apples. On bad weeks, we pretended tea was enough. I switched to public school and didn't fit in. Kids heard the way I talked, saw the way I dressed, and decided they knew the story. I ate lunch in the library to avoid questions I couldn't answer. After school, I cleaned, listed items online on a slow laptop, wrote product descriptions that made old things sound new, and tried not to think about the mansion. The marble floors, the lemon trees, the quiet halls. At night, Mom would sit on the edge of the bed with a shoebox of photos and say, "We were meant for better. We'll get it back." It sounded like a promise and a threat at the same time. Hope with a deadline I couldn't meet. At 18, my mom pitched a plan. I should marry rich. I didn't like it. It felt wrong. But I didn't see many options. No degree, no money, no contacts. My mom was an authoritative woman. Her word filled the room. She reminded me often that she'd survived a hard life, abandoned young, widowed by wealth, pushed out with nothing, and that I was all she had. I was young, inexperienced, and had no one else. I was afraid to disappoint her, afraid to be ungrateful, afraid that saying no meant I was choosing struggle for both of us. She framed it like duty. She had carried the weight this far. Now it was my turn to make it better. Part of me wanted to shout that I wasn't a product, that with time I could build something real. Another part kept counting bills and late fees and listening to the neighbors' arguments through the wall. I told myself it would be temporary, a role I'd play until we were safe. Then I'd quit the performance and be myself again. Except I wasn't sure who that was anymore. We built a persona. She sold one last bracelet and bought me a small starter kit, 2 classic dresses, a good coat, shoes that looked quietly expensive. She trained me on how to carry myself, how to talk without giving real details, and how to post photos from hotel lobbies and rooftops, never the apartment. Every lesson felt like sandpaper on my skin, but I learned it anyway. I practiced a calm laugh and a neutral smile in the mirror and hated how quickly it started to look natural. I used a fancier last name and hinted at an overseas boarding school without naming it. At night, I'd lie awake and try to list 3 true things about myself that didn't depend on money or lies. Some nights I couldn't. Other nights I could. I draw faces well. I notice small things. I want out. Then came the field work. My mom circled dates on a calendar, gallery openings with free wine after 7 p.m., charity previews where a friend could slip me in, hotel bars where nobody asks if you're a guest, lobbies with live piano on Thursdays. I learned to order the cheapest thing on the menu, tea, always tea, and make it last an hour. I memorized the names of 3 appetizers in case someone offered to share and I needed to sound casual. I sat at marble counters under soft lighting and pretended I was waiting for a friend who was on the way, scrolling through photos of places I couldn't afford to stay. Some nights I'd bounce between a rooftop and a late dinner crowd, taking the long way through a valet lane I had no business crossing, telling myself this was networking when it mostly felt like trespassing. I kept notes on which places were friendliest to solo women, which hosts smiled, which bartenders poured extra hot water so the tea would last. And I watched. Who tipped well? Who treated staff like furniture? Who looked at a stranger with curiosity instead of calculation? Then came a charity gala. My entry ticket was a pity favor from one of my mom's old acquaintances handed over with a, "Make the most of it, darling." The venue was all gold light and crystal, the kind of room where shoes whisper across the floor. I wore my mom's old green dress, the one cut clean through the waist with a low back that made me stand up straighter. We'd had it tailored to fit me exactly. Her last real pearls sat cool against my collarbone. I pinned my hair in a simple twist and carried a small satin clutch with a snapped hinge that still closed if you were gentle. I was standing near the bar pretending to study the auction catalog when he glanced over, then again. He approached in an unhurried way, giving me a second to decide if I wanted the conversation. "Evening," he said. "I'm Marcus." His voice was steady, like someone used to delivering hard news gently. He noticed my sketch of a sculpture in the program margin and asked, "Do you draw?" That's how it started. No line, just curiosity. We talked about the art on the walls, the playlist that was a little too upbeat for the room, the way people at events like this keep checking who's watching them. He asked what I did, and I gave him the light version of my script. He told me he was a cardiologist. Long hours, early mornings, the precise satisfaction of fixing what most people never see and everyone depends on. He said it as if it were a normal job, not a crown. I liked him immediately. He was warm without trying, and when he listened, he actually looked at me, not past me. He made a dry joke about the past canapes being engineered to stain dresses, and I laughed for real, not the polished version I'd practiced. Then my training kicked in. Doctor meant comfortable, not ultra-rich, not the target. The rules said smile, exit, move on. My stomach dropped. "It was so nice to meet you," I said, and I heard my voice thin out. I pretended I saw someone I knew across the room. His face fell, just a flicker, and he said, "Of course, have a good night." I walked away feeling like I'd stepped on something fragile. My cheeks burned. I stood on the balcony and stared at the city, trying to swallow the guilt. It wasn't that he wasn't rich enough, it was that he was decent, and I had treated him like a checklist item to be disqualified. That's when I knew the plan wasn't just hard. It was going to change me in ways I might not like. On the balcony, I met Peter. He didn't rush me. He stepped into the space like he already belonged there. Hand in his pocket, jacket open, eyes scanning the skyline before they settled on me. His first words were simple. "You look like you could use a minute that isn't performative." It made me laugh because it was exactly right. Then he offered, "I'm Peter," and waited, not pushing, not filling the silence. Confident, polished, and comfortable in his suit the way some people are comfortable in sneakers. He had that easy founder energy, direct eye contact, stories with clean arcs, zero hesitation. He told me he'd started a marketing agency young, scaled it fast, and now handled big campaigns, names I recognized from billboards and airports. He mentioned back-to-back trips, Tokyo last month, London next week, and told a short, funny story about a pitch meeting where the projector died and he sold the room with a whiteboard and a pen. He was the kind of person who talks like outcomes are inevitable if he's in the room. He joked about debating between two boats and being at war with himself over a teak deck. It wasn't subtle, but it was smooth. I matched him with my script. Said I'd finished boarding school abroad, taking a gap year before university, helping with a family business that spans a few boutiques in Europe. When he asked the name of the school, I smiled and pivoted. "It's tiny, hardly worth the brochure." When he asked about the business, I steered to him. "What's the campaign you're proudest of that nobody saw coming?" It became a pattern. He'd probe. I'd redirect, lightly, like moving a glass an inch to the left. He didn't seem to mind. If anything, he liked the mystery. He said, "You don't overshare. That's rare." He asked for my number with a line that was confident without being pushy. "If you ever want a conversation with fewer chandeliers, I'd like to buy you dinner." I said yes. We started dating. I looked him up online early on. His company website looked professional. A clean brand, polished case studies, team photos in glass-walled offices, and a client list that read like a highlight reel. I found articles about him too. Interviews on business blogs, a couple of listicles naming him a rising founder, and event pages with his headshot under Keynote. His social posts showed conference stages, VIP lounges, and airport lounges at odd hours. It all fit the story. Our life looked shiny. Rooftop restaurants with city views, host stands that greeted us by name after the second visit, tasting menus where the candles burned low, The servers described sauces like poetry, and the desserts arrived with gold leaf and a sprig of something you couldn't buy at a regular store. We learned the choreography. He'd slip the host a smile, I'd hang my bag on the tiny chair hook. We'd say, "Surprise us," and pretend we were the kind of people who could be surprised for a living. Weekends were just to reset. He'd text me a confirmation number and a photo of a lobby chandelier. We checked into boutique hotels with hallways that smelled like fig and cedar, asked for late checkout, and ordered room service after midnight. Burgers under silver domes, fries we ate sitting cross-legged on the bed, a carafe of coffee for the morning because it felt like planning ahead. Breakfast trays showed up on balconies with views of water or skyline, small jars of jam lined up like a still life. Peter cycled through high-end cars like outfits, sleek sedan one week, a low, loud coupe the next, an SUV with a whisper quiet close on the doors. He called it his collection and tossed off details about waiting lists and allocations. I matched him with my own version. I said my family kept cars overseas in storage, that it was easier that way with travel and taxes. I learned the spec language, the trim names, the limited editions, so I could nod in the right places. Valets started recognizing us. They'd say, "Welcome back," even when it wasn't true. On weekdays, he sent me links. A write-up in a business blog, a slick case study on his company site, a clip of him on a panel with a branded step and repeat behind him. I sent back a screenshot with a star emoji and a proud of you. At night, when we stayed in, it was minimalist takeout and minimalist TV. Half an episode before he got a late call, me sketching at the kitchen counter while he paced and talked about launches, deliverables, a campaign that could be the one. It felt like momentum, like we were already living inside the future we kept describing. He gave me small luxury gifts, delicate earrings in velvet boxes, a slim wallet with crisp stitching, a scarf that matched a dress he said he loved on me. We dressed up often, learned the names of valets at 3 different rooftops, and got used to the way hosts greeted us like regulars even when we weren't. When we stayed in, it was takeout sushi. A movie paused halfway because he had a late call, and me sketching while he paced and talked about campaigns and timelines. It looked like momentum. It felt like we were already living inside the future we kept describing. I liked him, for real. He hyped me up, talked to me like I had range, and made big plans with my name in them. He never introduced me to his family. When I asked, he said they were complicated. A father who measured everything in money and control, a mother who stayed out of the crossfire, and a younger cousin who always needed a loan that never got repaid. "They drain me," he'd say. "Every call is an invoice." It sounded plausible, and it kept me from pushing. I didn't introduce him to my mom either. If he stepped into our real apartment, the whole story would collapse in a minute. For my 20th birthday, he bought me Territory on the Moon. Not a trip, not a landing, but a claim to a named piece of imaginative space. It came as a parchment-style deed with coordinates, a poetic description, and my name listed as the sole steward. In plain terms, it was a literary territory, the right to use that moon setting for stories and world building, to name places and define rules inside that slice of fiction. It was over the top and a little theatrical, but it felt oddly perfect. I framed it. It felt like permission to make something that was mine, even if it started as make-believe. A year in, he pushed to meet my family. He'd been asking from the start, gently at first, and then with more insistence. Holidays, a quick lunch, even just a call. I kept finding excuses. When he asked about specific family members, I said they weren't public people, that they preferred a quiet life and privacy over photos and parties. Once, I even pretended to fly to Switzerland to see them. In reality, I stayed home, kept the curtains closed, and sent him prettied-up photos I pulled from the internet. Mountain views, cafe tables, a lake at dusk, with captions about catching up and jet lag. When he finally pushed to meet them, we staged a weekend like a set. I booked a tasteful rental with clean lines and good light, swapped out the host's prints for borrowed art, and filled the rooms with fresh flowers that made the whole place smell like money. We set out heavy coffee table books, arranged a perfect fruit bowl, and rehearsed our backstory. Family business overseas, constant travel, accounts managed through Europe. My mom slipped into character fast, silk blouse, pearls, the calm, confident voice she used at old parties. She treated the rental like a long-time home, adjusted a frame on the wall without looking, checked a window latch like she'd done it 100 times, and set her phone face down on the table as if she was used to juggling time zones. She apologized once, lightly, for jet lag that refuses to cooperate, and mentioned partners in Geneva and seasonal moves without specifics. She wore a clean-faced watch with no logo, carried a structured bag with only a slim card case and a lipstick, and moved room to room like she had muscle memory for the layout. When she talked about travel, she spoke in seasons. We're usually in Europe late spring. We prefer the coast in September. And when she hinted at money, she never used numbers, only allocations, distributions, and our position. She commented on the quality of the glassware, called the living room the winter salon like it was a habit, and referred to the place as our base when we're stateside, smiling as if it were one of several. Even the way she signed a note left on the console, first initial, last name, looked practiced, like a signature that had closed doors and opened others. That night, Peter proposed. The ring threw light around the room. When I asked about a prenup, because that's what people in his world usually do, he shook his head. "I don't believe in prenups," he said. "Love can't start with a contract about how to leave. I'm not here to support you like a sponsor, and I don't want to build a family on fine print. We're equals, or we're nothing." It sounded romantic and principled, and it hit exactly where I was vulnerable. Mom had always said no prenup meant security. I actually cared that he framed it as trust. I was thrilled, for her plan and for my feelings. I said yes. A few months later, we had a small courthouse wedding, just us and 2 witnesses, a quick exchange of vows, and a promise of a bigger celebration once everyone's schedules line up. I told him most of my family was in Singapore finalizing an important contract, juggling time zones and board calls, but they couldn't wait to come back and meet my husband properly. I kept repeating that flights were being arranged, calendars were tight, and we'd plan the full celebration as soon as they landed. We chose Italy for our honeymoon, postcard obvious and easy to romanticize. He booked flights and sent me links to sleek hotels with terraces over the water and breakfast trays with little domes. I packed 2 dresses that could pass for effortless, a pair of sandals that hurt by noon, and the hope that once we were away, the money talk would quiet down. From day one, his cards kept failing. At the airport cafe, "Europe is weird with US cards," he said, tapping again, then switching to another. At the train kiosk, "Fraud alerts, they always overreact." At dinner in Rome, the server came back twice, apologetic and patient, while he swore under his breath and refreshed a banking app that never seemed to load. He turned it into a bit, shrug, grin, a line about international banking being stuck in the 90s. I laughed along and said the machines must hate us. Inside, my stomach was tight. I didn't have cash to save us if this kept happening. Our dream hotel in Positano suddenly canceled the morning of check-in. An apologetic email about plumbing and unforeseen maintenance. Vacation season meant every pretty place was full. He scrolled through options at the train station, jaw set, and found a cheaper hotel inland, a 15-minute walk from the water and 2 stars shy of what he'd shown me. He looked at me like he wanted me to offer to upgrade us, to fix it with a card or a call. I didn't have it. I didn't have anything. So I made it a story. "Let's treat it like an adventure," I said, bright and certain. "We'll have 1,000 luxury stays in our life. This will be the one time we do the scrappy version. We'll remember it more." He exhaled, relieved to have a frame. "Exactly," he said. "Best stories come from detours." The cheaper hotel was clean and loud, the kind where the hallway echoes and the shower whistles. Our room had a narrow balcony that looked onto a courtyard full of laundry lines. We slept with the window open and woke to clinking dishes and a radio playing old songs. Breakfast was coffee that tasted like courage and a basket of rolls with little packets of jam. I took pictures of the light on the tile and said it was charming. He said we were living like locals. We both pretended that was the plan. We walked everywhere because walking is how you see a place, not because taxis added up. We split gelato cups and called it saving room for dinner, not saving money. When his card failed at a trattoria in Florence, he made a joke about banks closing for some mysterious European holiday. I smiled and said, "Let's try the ATM tomorrow. No rush." I kept the panic steady in my chest and didn't let it touch my face. There were moments that were truly lovely despite everything. A train window full of vineyards, a sunset in Vernazza that made everyone on the promenade fall quiet at the same time, a tiny church in Rome where the marble felt cool through my dress when I leaned back to look at the ceiling. We traced our names with our fingers on fogged glass after a sudden rain and laughed like kids when a scooter splashed us at a crosswalk. I told myself those were the real parts. I let them be. At night, we lay on the bed and planned our return trip, the proper one with suites and terrace breakfasts and a driver who knows the shortcuts. He said, "Next time, first class all the way." I said, "Next time, yes." I kept my voice easy. I kept the story intact. I didn't tell him I had 43 euros in my wallet and a card that would embarrass us both if I tried it. I didn't tell him I was counting coins in my head between churches. On our last day, we sat on the cheaper hotel's balcony, feet up on the rail, listening to plates clatter and someone's auntie laugh 3 floors down. He squeezed my hand and said, "We're good at this." I nodded. We were good at improvising, at reframing, at turning a problem into a charming narrative. I told myself that was a skill. I told myself next time would be different. I told myself many things, and for that week, under the Italian sun, I let the story be enough. Then the shine thinned. He said a big investment was in motion, a late-stage deal that would unlock a huge payout once contracts finalized. "My money's working," he told me. "It's tied up earning. Cash is tight now, but this closes soon and we're set." He promised bonuses, back pay, a reset where we'd laugh about this phase. In the meantime, could my family cover a few things, rent, deposits, a couple of invoices, just for a few weeks? That's when a small alarm started in my head. The story sounded polished, but it kept repeating. Still, I'd heard rich people talk like this: money working, assets illiquid, deals about to close. I decided not to dig. I told myself this was how wealth behaves: funds in motion, not in checking. I pushed the worry down. A different worry got louder. Now that we lived together, my own truth was easier to spot. I didn't have enough clothes to match the life I'd described. I rotated the same outfits and invented reasons. Shipments delayed, a closet in storage overseas, tailoring mix-ups. I kept makeup on the dresser like props, moved hangers around to make the closet look fuller, and folded sweaters with care to hide the thin elbows. Every morning felt like a test I hadn't studied for. I lied for him to cover the bills, and I lied for me to cover the image, and I told myself it was temporary. I kept saying, once his deal lands, we'll be fine. Even as the ground under us started to feel off balance. When rent got tight, I told him I'd cover the apartment while his money was working. It sounded simple enough, just a bridge until his deal closed. To make it happen, I took one of his gift bags to a resale shop, planning to turn it into cash for rent. Counterfeit. My mouth went dry. I checked the earrings, fake. The wallet, fake. I pulled out the moon certificate and felt sick even before confirming it. A novelty printout, no registry, no recognition, just paper anyone could order. On the sidewalk outside, I sat on a cold step with the bag in my lap and couldn't make my hands stop shaking. I felt stupid, angry, and small, all at the same time. I kept replaying every moment I'd believed him, every proof I thought I saw, every time I'd covered for him with a lie of my own. That night, we fought. I laid everything out: receipts, appraisals, screenshots. He denied it at first, said the shop was wrong, the appraiser was biased, the paperwork was in a different registry. His voice went from sharp to soft to empty. Then he dropped the act. "Fine," he said. "The agency is just me and a logo. There's no team. The cars were rentals. The dinners and hotel weekends were on credit. The client trips were cheap flights and day passes. The watches I wore were loaners. The apartment furniture was staged on short-term financing. The articles online, paid placements, the keynote photos. I bought a sponsor slot to get on the flyer." He didn't promise to pay anything back because there was nothing to pay with. No hidden account, no deal about to land, no family safety net, just debt and performance. It turned out he didn't have money at all. He had a costume and a script, and I'd believed my way into it. Then he looked at me like he'd been waiting to drop the final card. His shoulders squared, chin up, voice calm in a way that felt rehearsed. "We're married without a prenup," he said. "If you leave, I get 50%. That's how it works. Half of everything. Your family's money, your money, half." He said it like a checkmate, like he'd been patient long enough and now it was my turn to understand the rules. In his mind, this wasn't the end of a lie. It was the moment the lie paid out. He pictured accounts with long histories, a family balance sheet tucked behind tasteful privacy, assets managed through Europe, the kind of support he'd accused his own relatives of wanting from him. He thought I'd been hiding wealth, not hiding poverty. He believed my performance down to the last detail, the staged house, the careful clothes, the soft talk about allocations and seasonal moves. He truly, fully thought I had it. I stared at him and realized two things at once. He had built a life on borrowed images and credit, waiting for a payout he believed he deserved, and I had done the same thing in reverse, borrowed beauty, borrowed language, borrowed rooms, waiting for a rescue I told myself I'd earned. He hadn't figured it out yet. He didn't know I'd lied too, that there was no family fund to bridge anything, that my wardrobe in storage was 3 hangers and a careful rotation, that the staged rental was exactly that, staged, and that our shared future on paper was a few bills and a phone payment plan. In that moment, he still thought he'd married into safety. He thought the mask on my face was my face. I felt the heat leave my body. The room looked too bright. He went on, explaining community property, half this and half that, like a person reading an instruction manual. He said it like a guarantee, like weather. He didn't sound cruel. He sounded certain. Certain that I was the rich one. Certain that the performance in my direction was about to yield what his could not. I let him finish. I didn't correct him. Not then. I said I needed air, went to the bathroom, and stared at my own face until the anger drained and only the facts remained. I didn't tell him the numbers that night. I let him keep his certainty because the court would take it apart in daylight. We filed fast. 2 months of paperwork, a handful of tense meetings, and one short hearing where everything that looked big shrank down to numbers on a page. During discovery, his assets turned into rental agreements, credit card statements, and a business account with more fees than revenue. My assets were smaller still. A checking account that dipped under $500, a few clothes with no resale value, and a phone I was still paying off in installments. No property, no investments, no family fund, nothing to split except the truth. In court, the judge flipped through the file like a slim paperback. The ring, costume. The company, a sole proprietorship with debt. The gifts, verified counterfeit. Our shared banking, a few deposits, overdrafts, then silence. When the clerk read my total, roughly $400 after bills due, the room went quiet. By the time fees were counted, the judge assigned him half of what was legally ours, $200. That's when he found out. Not from me in a fight, but from a clerk reading a balance under fluorescent lights. I watched certainty slide off his face in stages. Confusion, then disbelief, then the particular anger that comes from realizing the other person was playing your game and you never saw it. He had assumed I was the exit. I had assumed he was the elevator. We were both just standing in a lobby with no doors. He looked stunned first, then furious, jaw tight, eyes rimmed with the kind of pride that hurts when it's punctured. The man who'd spoken in future tense suddenly had nothing to say. I felt heat climb my neck, not because of the amount, but because of the reveal. How easily I had chosen performance over reality, and how quickly the performance collapsed once the paperwork spoke. After the hearing, he waited for me in the hallway and exploded. He demanded to know where the money was, accused me of hiding accounts, called me a liar, said I'd played him. His voice bounced off the tile. People turned to look. I stood there and let it hit. There was nothing to correct. He'd just learned the truth the same way I had about him. On paper, under bad lights. He kept going. Said he'd make it back. Said I'd regret this. Said I'd ruined his life. A bailiff stepped closer. I told him quietly, "There's nothing left to take." It only made him angrier. Finally, the clerk called another case and the hallway moved us along. He left with $200 and a stack of notices. I left with a cheap folder, a headache, and the heavy relief of knowing the mask had finally come off, on both sides. I walked out into daylight, turned off my phone, and decided the next version of my life wouldn't need a costume to stand. That night, I sat on the floor of my room with a notebook and wrote it down in plain words. I don't want to be that person anymore. It wasn't cathartic, it was heavy, but it was honest. And it was the first thing in months that felt like a real start. When I told my mom, she was furious. She couldn't understand how I hadn't seen it, how I'd let a scammer and a gold digger into our lives, how I'd missed the signs. She called it careless, naive, unforgivable. I let her finish. Then I said, "He played well. I did too. That's the point." We'd both chosen performance over truth, and it worked on us because we wanted it to. I got a job at a diner. No glamour, just a steady schedule and cash tips that kept the lights on. Mornings started with the hiss of the griddle and the smell of burnt coffee from a pot that nobody remembered to rinse. By week 2, I knew the regulars by cup and posture. Black coffee and the sports page. Decaf with 2 sugars and a crossword. Tea with lemon and a quiet cry before work. I learned the rhythm of the place. Breakfast rush at 8:15, lull at 10:30, a second wave at noon that lived and died by the school bell down the street. The point-of-sale system was clunky. Buttons were in the wrong places, inventory counts were guesses, and the ticket printer jammed right when the line was longest. New hires kept double-entering orders or forgetting modifiers because the screens were a maze. One afternoon, while training a new server, I walked her through what I'd do if I owned the software. Put the most used items on the first screen by time of day. A guy at the counter, laptop open, looked up and listened. He'd been there a few times. Quiet, polite, the type to tip in cash and stack his dishes neatly. "Those ideas would save you how much time?" he asked. I laughed and said, "Hours a week, conservatively, sanity even more." He introduced himself as Ethan. He owned the small software company behind our POS. He was there to see how the product performed in the wild, and apparently I'd just given him a free usability audit. He asked if I had more ideas. I did. Plenty. For example, to flag special orders at the top of a ticket so cooks don't miss no dairy or gluten-free bun, or print a tiny kitchen summary by station to reduce shouting and errors. He scribbled notes on a napkin, then said, "Can you come by our office and walk my team through this?" I expected a polite follow-up that never came. Instead, he emailed that night. The next day, I took the bus to a small office with whiteboards, cheap chairs, and people actually shipping things. Ethan and 2 developers asked questions I knew how to answer because I'd lived the problems. How do servers think? What do cooks ignore? What breaks during rush? I showed them how the current flow created errors, then sketched a better screen on a whiteboard with a dead marker that I kept reviving like a CPR case. He offered me a part-time contractor role on the spot. Test the next build at the diner, collect feedback from staff, and help prioritize fixes. "You see patterns," he said. "We can teach you the tooling. We can't teach caring." We started small. The first update moved the top 5 breakfast items to the first screen and added a bright allergy banner. Ticket errors dropped, prep improved. The kitchen stopped yelling, "Who rang this?" every 10 minutes. Then we built the rush predictor using simple rules, past sales and weather, and it worked well enough that the manager started staffing smarter. The tips got better when orders stopped being wrong. The vibe softened, people stopped snapping at each other. Ethan was quiet about money, loud about accountability, and consistent. 3 things I needed. We'd stay after close sometimes, me with a stack of crumpled tickets, him with a laptop, mapping friction to fixes. He never treated the diner like just a use case. He treated it like a place that kept people fed and paid. That's how the door opened. From a sticky counter, 2 mugs of refill coffee, and the kind of problem you only notice if you're the one being blamed for it. It wasn't glamorous. It was better. It was real. Ethan and I started dating. No costumes, no staging. Weeknights were thrifted paperbacks on the couch, long walks after dinner, him doing the dishes while I read drafts out loud and circled sentences that didn't land. On weekends, we found a quiet coffee shop, split a cinnamon roll, traded highs and lows of the week, wandered the trail near his place where the city drops away. I showed him my sketchbook, the half-finished faces, the hands that never look right. He didn't try to fix me. If I was quiet, he let it be. And when I had a 10 p.m. idea, he grabbed a notebook and said, "Walk me through it." 6 months in, he proposed on that same hill, no audience, just cool air and city static. The ring was simple and solid. "Say yes if you want the truth to be the baseline," he said, and I said yes. Before we set a date, I told him everything. My father leaving before I was born, Lawrence and how good he was to me, the old will that erased us, the eviction and the thin-walled apartment, the plan to marry rich and the persona we built, the gala and the kind doctor I walked away from, meeting Peter with the cars and the polished website and the interviews, the proposal and his speech about no prenup, the courthouse wedding, the big investment story and the rent notice, the counterfeit gifts, the fight and the truth and the 2-month divorce that ended with $200, the diner job and the 2 fixes that actually helped. I cried through parts of it and finally said the thing I hated most. I lied because it felt easier than being poor and scared. He didn't make a speech. He squeezed my hand and said, "Thank you for trusting me. Let's build from here." After that, we picked a quiet date, told my mom straight, kept the guest list small, and planned a simple ceremony with good food and a playlist that lets people talk. No performances, no chandeliers, just the people who saw the mess and stayed. We booked a little garden behind a neighborhood cafe, the kind of place where the trees make their own shade and the chairs don't match but somehow look right together. I wore a clean, unfussy dress I could actually breathe in. He wore a suit that fit because he'd had it for years, not because it was new. We wrote our vows on printer paper and folded them twice to keep in our pockets. On the wedding day, I felt as happy as I've ever been, steady, unhurried, in love, and without lies. No script, no angles, no borrowed rooms. Just sunlight catching the rim of a glass, laughter rolling across the lawn, my mom dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief she pretended wasn't sentimental. We ate food that tasted like food, not a photo. We passed plates in seconds. When we danced, it wasn't performative. It was 2 people who had survived themselves and decided to keep going together. I kept catching myself smiling in a way that felt new, like my face belonged to me again. My mom and I talk. It's not perfect. She still reaches for shortcuts when she's scared, and I still get defensive when I feel judged. But we're trying. We keep the calls regular. We say the quiet parts out loud, the envy, the fear, the way pretending almost wrecked us, and we don't pretend the past didn't happen. Some days it's gentle. Some days it's work. Most days it's real. And that's enough. Performing wealth or love just creates more acting. Real stability is small and steady, budgets that add up, habits that stick, people who show up. It looks boring from the outside and feels peaceful from the inside. If you're stuck in a version of yourself you don't like, try this. Write down the lies, even the ones you tell to keep the peace. Pick one real skill you can deliver on and ship something small. Take anything symbolic in your life and make a practical legal version of it, and find one person who listens without needing the performance. Start there. It's not dramatic. It works.